Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me speak today. It's going to, it's a real pleasure and an honour. I've been part of Creative Mornings Derby for 3 years, pretty much to the day. I joined online during the pandemic when I found myself furloughed and I didn't really have a tribe, and I found Creative Mornings Derby and have on and off, give or take a few gaps, been part of it ever since. And at that time, I remember now how important it was to me to be part of a creative community of people like me. So it's great to be here 3 years later, giving a bit of a talk about my journey as well, and maybe about rounding off that 3-year period since then and kind of looking forward as well. So yeah, Reverie, it's really difficult to say, which is why not many people use it as a word. It's a state of being pleasantly lost in one's thoughts, a daydream. So that's the definition that I Googled. I'm not sure which dictionary it came out of, but that doesn't matter. It kind of gave me a bit of a hook, and it was given by the Omaha chapter with a lovely illustration that went with it that I'm sure you've all seen. And yeah, I thought, ooh, it's quite an exciting proposition to try and think about this word reverie and what it means to me and what it means to other creative people. However, it's also quite a tricky word because not many of us have time to daydream, to stop, to pause, to be in a state of reverie, because we've been caught up in a very kind of fast-paced, productive world that's based on productivity. So I'm hoping I'll share with you a little bit about the moments of reverie that I have had in and amongst the moments of non-reverie I have had in the last few years. So I practice reverie kind of most of the time, but I don't know I'm doing it, and probably you will too, because you're all creatives and you have to have inspiration from somewhere. I'm often the last person to leave the cinema, right? Anybody else the last person to leave the cinema has to see the last credit, the last person involved, because I feel like I have to pay reverie or do reverie to the people involved, the whole team, and particularly if you see a Marvel film, that's a long time to be sitting there. I'm often the last person in the gallery, as my friends have all had coffee and left and are waiting outside. Where's Clare? Because I'm in reverie when I go into an art gallery, I have to think about every single piece of art there, or a museum. I have to read absolutely everything. I don't know whether anybody else has that, but this is kind of like thinking about me and how I do reverie all the time, but I don't realise I'm doing it. If I go on a bike ride or a walk with my family, I drive them nuts because I'm always too slow, because I'm looking at what's around me in reverie. So I've been doing it as part of who I am since I was conscious of life, really. So I think I would just want to sort of throw that out there, that it's not something unusual to do. So what I wanted to do was to just put us in a little state of mind, being, before I go on to the rest of the talk, so that we can all be in that sort of little state together. So I've got a little breathing exercise that I've done many times with Hubbub Theatre Company. Some of you may know them. They're based at Dada. They're an inclusive theatre company with adults with learning disabilities. They're absolutely amazing, and they've created this technique called the Hubbub Way, which is really about slowing down to be creative and taking that time to be present, and making sure that pace doesn't exclude. So I want us to all try and slow down for this, right? Which is quite nice because we've got a lovely sunny day to do it. So we're just going to do 3 deep breaths. And if you want to close your eyes, you can. I know it's sometimes a little bit, you can be a bit self-conscious. So just close your eyes, and we're going to raise our hands and push them down as if that's the motion of the breath coming in and out of the body. So if you want to close your eyes, we're just going to breathe in and go, breathe in and out and in and out. You can make a sound, and in. Let it go. Just drop your shoulders. Lovely, everybody. Great. So, just get my notes up. You're all very quiet and listening. This is where the printed off version would have been better. So, first of all, I hope you're all nice and relaxed now. I want to take you to a time in that lockdown when we were all temporarily thrust into, that place of where normality was lost. I know we don't want to think about the pandemic, but sometimes just to kind of contextualise things, it's important to do that. I got this sort of sensation that everything that I knew, like my drive to work, had sort of dropped off a bit of a cliff, and I had a really difficult switching off when I was furloughed, and I just couldn't get my head round not being allowed to work. I thought it was a really strange sensation. So I did adjust eventually to that and got into this kind of routine of our family of 4 and the dog in a bubble. And I took sort of long walks in the woods, our local woods, Crouch Chase, with rotating members of our bubble. And I watched the bluebells come and I watched the bluebells go. And I stopped to appreciate the bark on the trees and the amazing patterns that the fungi made that lived on them. I went into that state of reverie every time I stepped into those woods. Immersed in the dappled light of the dreaming forest, I began to become pleasantly lost in my own thoughts. You can see where this is going. Out of this reverie came the idea that I wanted to do something for my community where I lived, and to give back after years of using it as a commuter village. So at that point, I'd been driving in and out of Derby 5 days a week for 13 years. So, at that point, I kind of thought, maybe this is time for me to find a little bit out about, where I live. But I knew that the mutual aid that was being given wasn't really something that kind of I was best placed doing. So I was captivated by this idea of Grayson's Art Club. I don't know whether you remember that during the pandemic. It was really successful. It just captured that moment of people who stuck at home being inspired by Grace and Perry to make their own artwork. So I just heard all around me that, Grace and Perry's Art Club, Grace and Perry's Art. Have you seen that? Have you done that? Oh yeah, I've been painting at home, I've been drawing at home. And I thought, there must be a whole stack of art somewhere in this village, in people's homes. So I kind of came across this idea of putting on an exhibition or a sharing in our village hall, a community art sharing, which I did in October 2020. It was a massive success. I was terrified because I thought, everyone's going to get COVID. That was my main worry. I had to go through all the risk assessments, all the social distance stuff, all the capturing everyone's names, all that stuff. But actually, everyone turned out to see it. It was kind of like a moment where the community went, really, this is an important thing to get behind, people of all ages. And people from the village submitted artwork. And I say artwork loosely. There was poems, songs. There was things that were made out of lost and found materials. There was painting by numbers. There was just like the complete range of artwork that people had done at home. And there was a willow weaving group who had sat in each other's back gardens in a socially distanced way and weaved willow sculptures together. And they literally took up like half the space. And I just got, there's more coming in of this willow stuff. And they'd obviously just weaved their way through the pandemic and kept each other sane, you know, kept each other from really sort of being very, very lonely and isolated. And I was totally inspired by this. So I then went on to do it well, it wasn't just me, it was a group of volunteers as well. I sort of thought of the original idea, but I didn't make it all happen myself. I have to give credit to some volunteers that worked with me on it. I did it in 2020, 2021, 2022, and yeah, there'll be another one this year in 2023. They've all been slightly different. But I realised that our village had this sense of being a creative place, a place where creativity was just a normal thing to do. And that was exciting for me because I hadn't really connected with that while I'd been doing my daily commute for 13 years to Derby. So it kind of made me think about communities in more specific terms. So then I had the opportunity to be part of the Creative Community Fellows programme with Derby Museums. I put forward this project and thought, well, it's a voluntary project. I'm not sure it fits the bill. I'm not doing it for a living. I'll see what they think of it. And I was accepted onto the programme. I was actually the only person in my cohort was doing something on a voluntary basis. But I felt so strongly about it that it obviously came across and that I was accepted on the second cohort of CCF, UK CCF. And after online webinars and learning tasks and things like checking my baggage, which is a metaphorical way of looking at what assumptions you make about a community, we went into a residential in Spicer Manor in Yorkshire. And again, there was a lot of COVID protocols around that, so it was quite a big thing to do, for them to do and for us to take part in. And there was a team of people who come over from America to do that with us from National Art Strategies USA, and they had to jump through lots of hoops to get to us. But it was amazing. It was a transformational experience. There were lots of great moments to be in Reverie. They built them into the programme. We had music by a fire pit. We had mindful walks in nature. We had people playing different instruments, fireside chats with mentors. They had built in this idea and time to take time out in order to be a creative community fellow. And that's what I loved about it. Well, it wasn't just learn. There was a lot of that as well, but in between it, interspersed were some really nice spaces to relax and be in that sort of state of reverie. So I then went back to work. Everybody was back to the new normal. We all knew it wasn't the new normal because normal had kind of almost not really, it's a very strange phrase. And as part of the CCF programme, there was another trip that was planned to go to America, to Maryland, and I was really lucky to be able to go on that trip. So a year later, after Spicer Manor, I went to Maryland with UK CCF, and I met a whole load of other people from the USA CCF. So I kind of like, my networks went like this, my inspiration went like this, and I was just in Reverie for those people that I met. I met some amazing people there. So, I know that I'm really fortunate to have been able to have that opportunity, but I do feel like I've got some incredible people that I can call upon who are like all over the world, actually, because the CCF kind of fellows went out over the world and came back to that retreat, which was at the Pearlstone Retreat Centre, which is very, very beautiful, beautiful grounds, lots of reverie going on in there. So getting a bit to the point about me and Clare Lim Creates, I came back with this idea that I had a new purpose forming inside of me. And it actually had started in that moment in lockdown. And it was something, it was a voice inside that I just was trying to press down for a while, but was kept on rising up again. And then I had the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy from my job in January this year, the job that I'd done for 16 years. And to cut a long story short, I did take it and tried to thought, I've got to do something new. I'm not really sure what that is yet, but I don't think it's going to get another job somewhere. That was kind of, I knew it wasn't that. I knew I didn't want to go and work in another organisation at that point. And obviously then the kind of obvious thing other than being unemployed is to work for myself. So that's kind of how I've come to sort of set up my business. Just before I left my job, I took a visit to the Oxfam in Belper, the bookshop. And I can highly recommend it if you've never been. It's just like a really fantastic, some nods, that's great, really fantastically curated secondhand bookshop. And I was in Reverie in this bookshop. I was like, I just want to read all these books about history and all these books about politics and all these books about art. And then this one book just sort of virtually jumped off the shelf into my hand. I was like, I need to read this book, but I can't read it right now because I've not finished. I hadn't finished working my notice. So I bought it and it sat on my shelf for a bit. Got it here. So it's this book. I don't know whether anyone else has seen it. It's Pause by Danielle Marchant. Now, I quite like it because it's got a purple cover. It's got purple, I like purple. Probably that's why I picked it up. And the subtitle is How to Press Pause Before Life Does It For You. And that's what attracted me about it, because I was kind of fairly exhausted, actually. It was just, trying to reinvent things after the pandemic. And I knew that I was at that point of potentially being burnt out. I wasn't burnt out because that's, I hadn't got there, but I was exhausted. So I bought this book thinking, right, when I stop work, I'm going to read that. And I did. So I took 6 weeks. I didn't know it was going to take 6 weeks, but I allowed myself the time it takes to do some journaling and to work out what really mattered to me, to work out what my values are. And I'd never really stopped to do that properly for me, what my values are, and to work out who I wanted to spend time with who share those values. So I did some journaling, which is in another book that my sister bought me about 3 years ago and had sat getting dusty on the shelf. Create Your Life Plan. And I thought, when am I going to have time to do that? Anyway, this was the time. So I haven't filled it all out because I've left some space, but I've got some text that I wrote into it, and I enjoyed the structure of it. So things like own your own passions. Wow, that's a nice page. So in Own Your Own Passions, I've wrote, I'm passionate about the environment, climate justice, planet Earth, community, social justice, art, Harriet and Arthur, my kids, my home, neurodiversity. So I've only got 7, but I'm sure I've got 8, 9 and 10 passions, but I've just not written them down yet. So there's loads of things in there that kind of helped me just do a bit of a life reset, to be honest, and work through pause. So one of the exercises that I did was this idea of creating a parachute. So it's in Danielle's book. So in the middle circle, you write in who's like your immediate support network, and then your outer circle, you write who are the people who are kind of the next people in that layer, and then again in an outer circle. And the idea is that when you need them, there's this parachute to kind of safely bring you back down to ground again if you get into freefall. So I did that, and I'll show people later, but it's just stuffed full of names of people, and it just was a really comforting thing to do. Because at one point I thought, I'm on my own, I'm doing this on my own, but it wasn't the case when I wrote it all down. So it made setting up the business less scary. So Clare Lim Creates. Identifying my passions also helped me with emergent strategy for the business. The why, the what, and the how of Clare Lim Creates, which is my business name. So I've come up with this idea is that I want to work with individuals, organisations and consortia to design and develop projects which encourage creativity. Because it's in all of us, and exploring it makes us feel better. Nurture nature, because it's all around us, and the more connected we are with it, the better we will feel and be compelled to protect it. And transform lives, because I know that what art and creativity can do when it's done well, and that opportunities to make art and be creative are needed more than ever. So I do that with my new business through consultancy, producing and mentoring services. Sounds simple. I just, I wrote it down and it became real. So that's how my business has been formed, and it's an ongoing process. But I kind of feel like I've arrived at it through a genuinely authentic process. And as for Clare Lim Creates, that must have been the result of daydreaming and reverie, because I really don't know where that came from. I think I just kind of got that through a walk in the woods, probably. So I'm now restored after my period of pause. I've turned my efforts into building relationships which matter, connecting people, place and planet in a meaningful way, and inputting where my passion and my wisdom and my experience are most needed. I'm still carrying on practicing Reverie, or doing Reverie, whatever you choose to think of it, and it definitely works as a way of finding inspiration, just taking time out. So I brought a couple of things. I brought a rose that's now slightly faded because of the journey, but this is a Darcy Bustle rose, which is very fitting for some of you know me that my background's in dance. I bought a leaf that was made by a participant in one of the workshops that I set up related to Art Share Crouch. This was done with artists, facilitated by artists as part of an Art Share Crouch workshop. And then I've bought a couple of things that I did that you can have a look at later. This is the fungi from the forest I talked about. These are photographs of my mantelpiece. And then this is an amazing pumpkin that I took a photograph of in Baltimore because it was the fall and it was pre-Halloween when I went, and everybody had decorated their shops and their doorsteps with things to do with the autumn, and I just thought it was so beautiful. So being in America on the East Coast in the fall was very exciting. Yeah, I think that's me. Thank you for listening.